makes the poorhouse story special?
So the Wellington County House of Industry and Refuge, or as it was known as the poorhouse, is one of the oldest in Ontario, but the story had been lost. The history of this poorhouse had been lost. And if you read any general history of Canada, even social history of Ontario and Canada, you will not find the story of these rural poorhouses in it. There were 9 in southern Ontario. That story had simply been lost. So when we started this exhibit, doing the research for it in 2005, 2006, we were really starting out with very little information. We were fortunate enough to have wonderful photographs by a Laura photographer, John Connon, who gave us a lot of clues. But that is really what makes this story so special, that it had been lost to history. We're trying to retrieve that. And the site was also designated a National Historic Site in 1998 as the oldest remaining rural poorhouse and industrial farm in Canada. So the site itself has been talking to us and giving back information for 16 years now.
What value does the book bring to the Wellington County Museum and Archives visitor experience?
Well, after we finished the exhibit and visitors would come and go through the exhibit, we began to notice that many of them were asking us for more information. They were really intrigued by this story of social welfare that they had never heard before. And so many visitors asked, is there a book? Is there more reading material? And it is a lot to take in when you come to an exhibit and try to read exhibit panels, look at all of the photographs. And so we knew that this book would fill a need, a great interest in the public, to be able to take something home and reflect on it and learn more.
What is the value in telling the story of the poorhouse?
The value of the poorhouse itself, it is like a monument to the beginnings of social welfare in Ontario. This was the beginning of institutionalization of the poor, and the beginning of those social welfare policies. So many of the things that we take for granted now that are the safety net for us when we become vulnerable or marginalized. But for those in the 19th century who were aged, who were alone, many migrated here from the British Isles and were alone. Widowed, orphaned, a mother and her children abandoned. There was nothing. There was no other support for them. So this was filling a need, this institution.
How did the site itself help you to piece together the story?
Well, this building is an artifact itself. The whole site, a barn is original to the site. There is the cemetery. But it was like a puzzle because the story had been forgotten about the house and the industrial farm. It took us a few years, but also it has continued all throughout these 15 or 16 years of piecing together the puzzle of this site. So even in this photo behind us, when we look at the stone building behind the inmates or residents, as they were later called, we didn't know what this building was. And it took piecing it together from documents and from other photos to figure out that this was the stone wash house that had been built at the same time as the poorhouse, behind the poorhouse. So really on the same footprint as where the archives is now. But that's just an example of one of the many, many puzzles that we tried to put together, as well as trying to name a lot of the people, identify them, and from there tell their story, which is the most important thing.